for your continued witness and your continued standing up to close the School of the Americas. Because one of the things that we always want to talk about in the U.S., which is really built upon this myth of democracy. This myth of democracy, because we really have a definition of democracy, that is that those in the U.S. and those business interests seek to control everything in the region, and will use anybody and will use all of their money and military might in order to get that done, and have no problems educating or training surrogates to go forth and do the bidding of the corporations in the United States. It's always interesting, you know, all over the world when you look at it. Folks talk about democracy, 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 and then when the people elect somebody that they don't want to have elected, then they engage in trying to destabilize and overthrow. The issue is that we understand that this idea of democracy is only built on greed when it comes from the United States. It's only built on the fact that we really want to have satellite states that represent American interests. And so when we talk about closing the School of the Americas, you're talking about closing the training camp for terrorists that the United States trained to go into the regions of Latin America and basically destabilize that which advances the cause of people. That's our struggle. Our struggle is a struggle of dignity and a struggle of true democracy and true self-determination. People should always have the right to determine their own future. Somebody else should not intervene and try to determine the future for them. Right? Now, if you look at just about anywhere in the world where we claim to have some interest, the fact is that we will engage really our politics, and the paradigms we build will be that which really further enslave people and do not bring liberation. We got to understand that when we stand up and say close the School of the Americas, we're really talking about people being able to engage in their own liberation, their own sovereignty, their own right of self-determination. The fact is that here in Washington, D.C., because we're in Washington, right? Yeah. You know, you're in a colony here. You're in a colony here. Let me paint a picture so that you get the understanding of it. When the voters in D.C. brought Marion Barry back to office after his drug conviction, if you remember what happened, Congress all of a sudden pulled away all the money and said D.C. was bankrupt, even though it wasn't bankrupt, and they put in place a control board. A control board that orchestrated the election of the next mayor, which was Anthony Williams. And the fact is that that's the way it works. It's like the people cannot make decisions for themselves because there's this hidden voice behind the curtain, almost like the Wizard of Oz, that is speaking, and nobody knows who is speaking. But the fact is there's obviously political and financial interests that people in the United States try to represent all over the region. Or the fact is, in Mexico and Chiapas, you pass NAFTA, and the fact is that the native community there in Chiapas uprises. Why? Because they understand that the whole policy in NAFTA was really to take over a region for corporate interests. It was not about self-determination. It was not about providing jobs. It was not about any of that other stuff. It was about making corporations in America richer and richer and richer. So when we look at it, we understand that there is this underlying thing that we got to oppose. And that is, we got to oppose when folks really try to orchestrate for other people policies that really are detrimental to people. When we look at sort of doing sanctions against Venezuela. Why? Why? Because, you know, we want to, again, try to control the outcome of a situation because the people are continuing to decide for themselves. And that's what we're really talking about. We're really talking about denying people the right to decide for themselves. And if they decide for themselves and it's against our vision of what it should look like, then all of a sudden we create a kind of intervention or sanctions. We need to oppose all kinds of interventions in countries in Latin America and countries around the world. I just got back from the occupied territories in Palestine, and you see almost the same thing because everybody talked about elections, and Hamas gets elected in Gaza, and all of a sudden there's a whole blockade of Gaza. Right? Again, People want democracy, but they only want democracy according to their own understanding of what democracy should look like and according to their own understanding of who should be representing people. Well, we need to stop that kind of intervention, that kind of nonsense, that kind of pain that continues to get inflicted on people. And we need to continue to stand up for that which is just and that which is right. Yes, close the School of the Americas, because if we want to talk about terrorism, what happens at the School of the Americas but terrorists are trained? What happens at the School of the Americas but those who opposed organized labor are trained? What happens at the School of the Americas? Those who really want to basically launch coups to destabilize a whole region, so for the benefit of those who really rule with capital. Again, we stand up for that which is right, and we stand up for that which is truly and really democratic. We stand up for that which is about self-determination, and people able to make choices for themselves without outside forces trying to manipulate and destroy any movement forward. Because it's always interesting, folks want to go back. Why do they want to go backwards? Well, you go backwards because basically the corporations are in charge. I always remind folks that when you really begin to understand what happens internationally, you can start by looking at history right in the southern United States during that time of enslavement. Right? The fact is, you want cheap labor. The fact is, you want people with no rights. The fact is, you want people with no voice. The fact is, you want to control people, their whole livelihood, their whole dignity, and all of their expectations. Why? Because that way, companies like plantations could make more and more money on no labor, cheap labor. Labor that you didn't have to pay for. Well, that's the same paradigm that folks want to spread around the world. You end enslavement in the U.S., supposedly, but then you make sure you also carry out that model of enslavement in other parts of the world. And so we're really standing up against the enslavement of human beings and for their dignity and for their rights. And I thank you for just being out here. It's good to be out here with you. It's good to be with Father Roy. Amen. And I give you all the praise for continuing to witness. God bless you.
So we are a local workshop project, cultural community project called Cosita Seria. If anyone is local, lives in DC, we have free workshops every Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. in La Casa in Mount Pleasant. Everyone is welcome, all levels, ages. If you've never picked up an instrument before, we would love to have you. This is music that comes from mostly Veracruz, Mexico, southeastern Mexico, son jarocho music or traditional string music. And the song that we're going to sing now it's actually a newer song. It's not as traditional, but it's called El Presidente, and it's basically a calling out to the president. So we think it's pretty appropriate for this gathering. And if folks don't speak Spanish and you have questions about the lyrics, feel free to come up and ask us afterwards. But basically, it's taking the president to task for his refusal to close the School of the Americas. And feel free to insert any other elected official or public official in there instead of Señor Presidente as you are listening to it. Gracias.